Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. My name is David Talbot, Managing Director and Head of Research here at Red Cloud Security. I'm delighted to host a Red Cloud webinar on silver today. We are going to hear from Silver Viper Minerals CEO Steve Corp, and during today's webinar, he will provide an overview and outlook. Then we will take some questions. You can type your questions into the chat box at any time, and we will get to as many as we can. But before we kick things off, first we need to discuss the fine print. During the Silver Viper webinar, forward-looking statements may be made. I would direct listeners to their forward-looking statements outlined on page 2 of the Silver Viper corporate presentation. That can be found on their website, silverviperminerals.com. For Red Cloud Securities, I'd highlight this webinar is for informational purposes only. It should not be considered a solicitation or recommendation to buy or sell securities. We note that this call does not consider the particular needs or situations of individual investors. Participants should rely on their own investigation and seek their own professional advice before investing. Please see our most recent research located on the Red Cloud website for specific disclosures on Silver Viper. Now, before Steve steps up, I'd like to say a few words. First, a plug for our upcoming Oktoberfest conference over 3 days, October 18th, 19th, and 20th. We will have presentations from over 80 companies. This will include Silver Viper, plus various keynote speakers. Attendees can register at redcloudfs.com. So today silver's trading at $22.65, and the gold-silver ratio is currently around $78. I'd say a little bit higher than it's been most of the year. We do think that silver to copper is just as important as silver relative to gold. You know, silver's unique. It's both a precious and industrial metal, so there's good correlation between silver and copper. And then you've got mine production. You know, the majority of gold production comes from gold mines, but the majority of silver production is driven by byproduct production. The largest driver comes from zinc mining, then primary silvers, then copper mines, and then gold mines to follow up. So really, as base metal production declines, we do expect silver production to be under pressure as well. And a declining copper mine supply is driving copper. That should also drive silver. And then there's physical demand and substitution. And really what you need to know here is that when gold and silver prices rise, jewelry consumption often falls. While 45% of the physical gold demand is from jewelry, only 27% of demand for silver is from jewelry. So there isn't that much pressure from retail. However, those that did once buy gold jewelry may look to silver in times of higher pricing. Also, the silver in use in industry isn't as elastic due to its electrical chemical properties. So its best substitutes would be gold, platinum, palladium, but those are going to be more expensive most likely. So, you know, we are looking at a shift into renewable energy technology in China and the USA. Silver is needed for solar panels, batteries, other electronics. As demand for renewables increases, it's natural to assume that silver's industrial demand will increase over the coming years. And then finally, strong investment demand. You know, net physical demand for silver has increased this year. And if investment demand continues to remain strong, along with this industrial recovery, we do expect this to continue to pressure the upwards price of silver. So with that said, you know, I now turn it over to Steve to update our audience on Silver Viper Minerals. Take it away, Steve.
Yeah, thanks, David, and thanks everyone for taking time out of their day to listen to the update on the Silver Viper story. We're very excited about, you know, where we're at as a company and the number of the catalysts that we're going to have moving forward. There we go. Just quickly, again, we mentioned it, but I will be making some forward-looking statements today. You know, for me, when looking to invest in a precious metal exploration company, you know, there's 3 things you should really be focused on. 1, that's got a high-quality asset. 2, that has lots of potential. And 3, that has a strong management shareholder group behind it. I think after you listen to today's presentation, you'll see why we check off all those boxes, but we do summarize a lot of our points here, you know, if you want to come back and review this. The project's located in eastern Sonora. You take a paved highway from local town from Hermosillo to the local town of Nacori Chico, and from there it's about 30 minutes in on a well-kept gravel and dirt road. Here you can see the claims. We own everything in red 100% already. We gave Pan American a 2% NSR project-wide for all those claims. That also gave us, you know, all the ownership of the historic database, you know, the 52,000+ meters of drilling and 188 holes that were drilled on La Virginia, Con Virginia, and Las Guatas. And then, we did a back-end loaded option agreement on those claims in blue. You can see we've made the first 3 payments. Obviously the last payment is the larger payment. Of note, half of that can be paid in shares at our discretion. We've found a lot already on this project. We've come out with a maiden resource earlier this year. We certainly think it warrants and justifies that payment. But that deal was structured in a way that we were allowed, we could put all the money into the ground where it belongs before we have to make those larger payments. Again, you can see, kind of roughly where we are in the state of Sonora. This belt in particular is highly underexplored. Most of this belt has very poor access to get in and do any, kind of the modern exploration that you see in other parts of Mexico. Our project was found because of Dolores and mine finders. They flew this whole mountain range looking for another Dolores. They settled on La Virginia being the lookalike on surface, though where they were drilling on the project didn't turn out to be exactly like Dolores. What we found in the El Rubi area is definitely, looking like the same stuff that they have at Dolores. The only other modern operation has been El Tigre, which was a past producing mine that's now in another junior called Silver Tiger. But, that's almost 200 kilometers of strike in between those 2 targets with no modern operations. And that's very strange when you're looking at the periodicity of mines in Mexico. I say that most of this belt is very remote. For us, there's a big feature that you can't really see on this map, but there's a large river that runs kind of north-south down this part of the state. And for the most part, there are no bridges across that river. There is one by Chico, that local town that I referenced. So it's very easy for us to get into this project. And in this part of Mexico, we're not dealing with, or on our project, we're not dealing with ejido. We do have an ejido off to our eastern boundary, but on the project itself here, we're dealing with 2 or 3 different private ranchers that control all of the ground, and we have land access agreements in place for where our camp is and where we're doing all of our drilling and all of our work. I guess another part of infrastructure is there was just recently, in the last couple of years, a major power line corridor put right through the middle of the project that connects that town of Chico to the next town down the road at Mesa Tres Rios. And we've always had water year round for drilling and for camp and everything else. We get snow in the winter, overnight, and then it melts and it gets warm during the days. But we have these different arroyos in the area that have streams that run year round. This picture you can see up in the top right, that is El Rubi, where we made our discovery on the project and where the bulk of our resource is located, and frankly, where all of our work has now been focused on the project. I mentioned El Rubi. One of the reasons we were able to get into El Rubi is kind of how technology went along with man-portable drill rigs. When mine finders and Pan American were doing their exploration work in the other area, they were bulldozing in roads. They were using large track-mounted rigs, and they were having a lot of success. And they, frankly, ignored most of the project. When we looked at the database, we saw, that this part of the project had never been mapped, that had never been sampled. The same trend that runs through that historic area runs north-south for tens of kilometers, if not hundreds. And you see, the system outcrop in these silicified dikes that stick up like a spine kind of out of the ground. There was one of these sitting right there at El Rubi. And again, we just looked at the database and it had never even been sampled. So, credit to our guys. They, put boots to the ground and did a large mapping and sampling program. They identified El Rubi as their #1 target. Since, our discovery there, we've been increasing that mapping and sampling. We've identified a number of new targets, a few that we put a couple holes into that, hit some mineralization, but not quite at the same, obviously, the grade that we've seen so far at El Rubi. We're going to be testing 2 new targets here moving forward. One that was identified while we were doing some line cutting for a big geophysics program that's going to be starting at the end of October. And that found a breccia kind of outcrop on surface, so hopefully a lookalike to El Rubi, but we'll drill that and see what that's like, and that's the Paradonis target. And then during our geochem program, we also identified the La Colmena target to the northeast of El Rubi, and that'll be tested here over the next month or so. So potentials for new discoveries moving forward here, and we're going to do the drilling while we're doing that geophysics program to get the rigs out of the way so they're not messing around with any of the magnetics or anything that's happening when we run the month-long geophysics program. That's going to be a 3D IP and magnetotellurics program. And that program is being done to identify the contact between between the rhyolite package and hopefully the sediment package that's being below, because on certain types of deposits in the world, we believe that that ours is lookalike for. It's that contact that starts producing these multi-million-ounce gold base metals with some silver. We've already off to a good start, but if that model holds true, then it would be quite a game changer for the company. I mentioned the package here. You can see the rhyolite package where it says we don't know where the metasediment package is, and again, that's why we need that deep geophysics, because we want to see that magnetic difference that shows the change in rock type. Our resource is all located in this andesite package, and it's the combination here in the andesites of this western zone. That's our long, broad, lower grade, but 100+ meter wide intervals. You combine that with the main El Rubi structure, which is our breccia structure that hosts the kind of the high grade gold and silver numbers that we see in that. That's this vertical structure, and then we get a lower grade kind of halo around that structure, particularly in the footwall, that's produced 20 to 80 meter wide low grade halos around that high grade structure. So this really sets itself up for open pit heap leach mining in this area. Our metallurgy has certainly been checked off and shows that this leaches very well. And this is the same type of stuff that exists in some of these other deposits around the world that we're kind of looking at from a model. And Dolores is one of these types of deposits. Here is kind of, we just added this slide and what our exploration model, is on this. And one of the groups that really kind of gave us confidence in this model was Crescat Capital and Quentin Hennig. He really dove into our database, before our last placement. They obviously took a very large position on that placement. But it was him relating a lot of the signature elements that we were seeing here. Our deposit is an epithermal deposit, but it's not your traditional Mexican epithermal deposit. So this is the type, where you can see circled in red here, this carbonate-based metal system deeper down is the model moving forward. Like I said, we're going to be running the geophysics as a first step on that. But, right now, so far, we've been sitting high up above that red in the epithermal quartz gold silver zone. But as we move down, and Quentin related it to his experiences that when he was at Newmont and saying they called these types of deposits, gold base metal deposits. And yet we're saying, well, we have barely seen any base metals. Obviously we got gold, but we've been, a gold silver rich environment. So those types of deposits tend to become multi-million ounce gold deposits. The one that to us looks, the most close in that sense is the Kellyan mine in Indonesia, which, again, multi-million ounce gold deposit. We've seen some sniffs of this type of material that's come up, kind of explosively higher up into the system. But, hopefully, we can hit something pretty spectacular moving forward. And that drilling, probably begins, I would say, in December or early in January on the back end of that geophysics. Again, I don't need to spend too much time. Most of the people that are, follow this company certainly have seen our high grade, El Rubi structure and some of the grades that we've hit there. Again, we'll continue to try and replicate those as we, both expand on El Rubi, and then, hopefully on some of these other targets around the project, we can make another discovery similar to El Rubi. Quickly here, you can see that maiden resource that we came up with. And again, all of El Rubi is open pit on this resource. That's important to know when you're comparing apples to apples. The average grade of the open pit heap leach mines in Sonora is about a 0.5 gram gold average grade. So you can see our gold grade in itself is already higher than that. And then you throw in another, 0.5 gram gold equivalent of silver in there using 70-1, and you've got very attractive grade for an open pit heap leach operation. And I should point out that our silver recoveries in the low grade, on first pass were around 76%, which is very good for leaching as well. So it's not that we're just including that, saying that, and you can't recover the silver by that method. It's definitely something that can be done. I think we can bring that up with additional metallurgy. And we're also going to be doing some ore sorting or scanning studies, lots of different things that I think will help, with the economics, with the grade potential of what you're going to be running through the mill to really make this that much more attractive. But, again, for maiden resource, we were thrilled. It exceeded our guidance on the amount of gold and silver that we had in that maiden resource. To see it hold together well enough that the independent was actually comfortable, including a bunch in indicated was another pleasant surprise on that resource. We thought it was all going to be inferred, but, they said, look, this thing is holding together so well. We're highly confident to, on the spacing that we had to bring it into indicated. So again, a very, nice check mark for that El Rubi portion of the project. Here you can see again the outline of the pit and what was left over. There wasn't a lot left in El Rubi, in the those underground blocks, but what it was left there is actually extremely high grade. What the blocks that were left there, about 8,000 tons, grading 15 grams gold and over 300 silver. So not enough to be included in an underground resource, but that's one of the things we're working on moving forward. We'll be developing an underground resource at El Rubi, both in the rhyolite lower andesites and the rhyolite package, and then obviously if we can hit on that deeper testing, then that contact between the meta sediments and the rhyolites will also be obviously a major part of an underground resource on that portion of the project. As metals prices potentially go up, you're going to also get a bunch more ounces out of the historic area. You can see this lower image here, the pit outlines that we had on that older part of the project. You lose a lot of ounces in the pits here because of the terrain. El Rubi is very favorable for open pit mining. It's a 2K by 2K flat plateau, and the deposit comes off the southern end, so you don't really have much of a pit wall on the southern end of El Rubi. In the historic area, it's much steeper. It's definitely more favorable for underground mining, but we do, have the ability to have some starter pits up in these areas, but that leaves a lot of ounces left over. These pit models were done at 1650 gold. So again, if you see one of these dramatic increases in metals prices that we're all banking on, and David alluded to some of the reasons why we think we're going to see that in gold and silver, there will be a lot of additional ounces that you can gain in the historic area on this project. Here you can see this is El Rubi, looking across, and you can see the rough outline of the pit there. There's about 300 meters here of area that was never drilled before we did the resource. So we've filled in some of those. We've definitely hit mineralization through that. So you're going to see, that pit potentially change its shape and certainly, start to add some additional ounces to the open pit and into the underground. But this takes you to the bottom of that arroyo to the southern end of Rubi. And again, you can see some high-grade sniffs that we hit down there drilling at the bottom that were certainly not in the resource because obviously from spacing and where they're located. And again, we think these were high up in the system, and then deeper below in that area, we could get into that main El Rubi structure. The southern end of Rubi here is kind of a down drop block. And you do get into the rhyolites, which isn't as favorable for that high grade broad mineralization that we see up in the andesites, but it's definitely still mineralized. And that's also very important as we go on to test those deeper targets, that we're not chasing this structure that's been shifted by faulting or anything so far as it's continue to go down into the rhyolites, and that geophysics is going to light up that structure. It's going to light up the contact. To the northern end of this pit, we also think we're in another down drop block. And so that geophysics is really going to give us an idea of where the El Rubi structure has gone as we potentially expand this pit to the north. I mean, this is only about 500 meters wide here in this particular part of the pit. So we've got, potential for strike length of almost another 1.5 kilometers up to Rubi North. And, it's all sitting in the same structure that runs north-south. And we see a lot of potential to expand moving that way. But we do believe that geophysics is going to help us vector in on the structure as we move north. I mentioned some of those targets that we'd be testing here while we were doing that geophysics program. You can see Peridonis up here, which sits in both of these targets are in potentially a parallel trend that's about, at El Molino, it's about 2 kilometers away from El Rubi to the east. Peridonis, El Molino sits in the bottom of the arroyo, and we saw some very interesting things there. Certainly saw that it was mineralized in our drilling. Peridonis sits up on top of the big cliff that's in that area, and then continues through the mountain range all the way up to La Colmena. So again, this is a potential system that parallels the El Rubi system, and hopefully we can make a new discovery on one or both of these targets. Then as you move further north, you move into that La Gloria area, which is a 3 kilometer by 3 kilometer zone of alteration that's, sits in that same mineralized structure that runs north-south, but it sits at the intersection of an east-west running structure as well. And this is a large porphyry target that we're not focused on, but is certainly very interesting for what we're doing here moving forward. And we are exploring some avenues to maybe add some value for shareholders by possibly partnering with someone just on the porphyry area. There's some majors that are doing exploration for porphyries in Mexico. And we think this is a great target that we could definitely add value for everyone if we can do a separate deal on that portion of the project. I already mentioned metallurgy here. You can see the basic bottle roll test that we did, and very good recoveries on first pass, above gold recoveries above 90% across all grade ranges, and then silver recovery 62 to 76%. And like I mentioned, that low grade silver sample being the best silver recoveries is also important for the leaching, the heap leach potential on the project. I should mention Silver Viper is a member of the Belcara Group, which is a private management group. We have 3 public companies under our management: Silver Viper, Oryx Minerals, and Barcele Minerals. This is a group with a very long track record of success in the industry. The last big one that shows our model to T was Orco Silver, which was a project that our company where we put the very first drill hole into the La Preciosa deposit, grew it to 270 million ounces of silver, and then ultimately sold it in a bidding war between Coeur and First Majestic, with Coeur winning out with a bid of over 350 million US. That's really our model. Our model isn't to try and take anything to production ourselves. We understand where our strengths lie. It's certainly in discovery and in exploration. So we'll take something somewhere along the exploration timeline, whether it's never been drilled before or had some drilling success. We'll take it as far as a feasibility study. But we looked at, when the timing is right for our shareholders and for us to vend it off to one of the major mining companies. We only get involved with projects that we think have the size potential for those major mining companies. And for us, that's at least 1 million ounces of gold equivalent or 100 million ounces of silver equivalent. And we certainly see that here at El Rubi and the other projects that are within the Belcara Group. But what that group allows us to do is to, one, have the experience that we have on the geological side, with 3 senior geologists, Dale, Ben, and Art, and their experiences of working all over the world, working for juniors, working for majors. A single company group can't afford to have those guys on staff. The G&A would be too big, but we're able to share our salaries across, all of the Belcara Group companies. We share our rent, our office, all those general G&A things. When you can split them between 3 groups, it just ends up meaning that our burn rates tend to be lower and more of the money goes into the ground where it belongs. Just quickly, you can see the share structure. Our last financing was done in June. We hard capped that one at $6 million after upsizing it a couple times. Lots of interest, and we're not in a race to go back to the market and raise capital right now, especially on the back end of this summer where not only us, but all of our peers, the volumes went low. I think everyone, finally there was some restrictions freed up from COVID and went out and traveled and, sold a lot of their positions and just said they're taking the summers off. So you saw most of our peers, and then you've seen it across, where everyone's kind of taking a hit on share price on low volumes. It's starting to pick back up a bit now or settle in. And I think, as metals prices hopefully start to move up moving forward here, you're going to get a lot of attention pouring back into the space like we've seen a couple times here during COVID. And I think you'll see that generalist money from those funds start to come back in. I think you'll see M&A activity pick up as travel restrictions are being, lessened here. And I think we just saw obviously a major one with the Agnico merger with Kirkland Lake. But I think that's just the start. I think that's going to put pressure on a lot of others to, either buy some things or get bought themselves by some of the bigger companies. So I think it's a very exciting time to be placed in precious metals, and especially in the junior sector, because I think there's not a lot of precious metal stories out there, especially ones that have exposure to silver like we do. And I think, you're going to see a lot of M&A activity pick off the ones like us, like some of our other peers that are the quality, companies out there already with a resource, with an attractive resource and in a very good jurisdiction that's politically stable in Sonora. And so we're looking forward to what the next, kind of year is going to bring for our company. And then if we can have some, luck/success with the drill rig on some of those exploration targets, on that deeper testing, I think, there's a lot of catalysts and a lot of good things to come for this company moving forward. One other note there, obviously management, you see 20%. That's a staple of all the Belcara Group companies. We believe the best place to invest our money is in ourselves. So you see us buying in the open market. You'll see us participate on placements. That's just something we've believed in all 3 Belcara companies. So management owns at least 20%. In summary, we've got a high quality asset. We're in a very, solid jurisdiction. Sonora is #1 gold producing state in Mexico and has a lot of silver production itself. Very strong management technical team behind the project. Lots of potential still, both at El Rubi and on some of the surrounding targets. Very strong shareholder support. We have a very strong institutional owning, management obviously owning over 20%. and we're well financed with that $6 million raise that we completed in June. With that, I would like to thank everyone for their time, and we could open it up for some questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Steve. Great presentation as always. So we are now going to kick off the Q&A portion of the webinar. So please, reminder to everyone that you can type your questions into the text box at any time, and we'll get to as many as we can. So Steve, we previously spoke in May, and that was just after you released your initial resource, I believe. Can you maybe explain how that initial milestone has helped open up some investors' eyes when considering looking at Silver Viper?
Well, I mean, it definitely showed that we're already at a size that is appealing for mining in that state. I think those open pit heap leach mines also start about a 500,000 ounces, and they get going and they just kind of keep going. So to already be past that threshold for a lot of those, I guess I would say junior producers that are operating a lot of those different deposits, but to still show the potential, being open along strike, obviously the depth and everything else that we have here, that we have the best potential for those big senior mining companies as well moving forward. And the resource, frankly, grabbed the attention of, there was already majors that were paying attention based on our drill results, but it definitely, triggered some to come and even during COVID, do some site visits, see what we're working on, get a lay of the land. And the feedback has been phenomenal from those guys, and they're very much following us closely. It wouldn't shock me if at some point, people have heard me say this in the past, but I do believe at some point we're going to have a strategic from one of those, major mining companies. And so we'll see, but all we can control is continue to work and drill and continue to add value for shareholders and add value on the project. Okay, so El Rubi right now is your main deposit. It looks like it's about 83% of your silver resources, 95% of your gold. Do you see as much potential at some of the other zones that you're starting to look at now as you do at El Rubi? They definitely have the strike potential that these system like I said, it runs for tens of kilometers. This mineralized trend and structure that goes all the way from south of where the historic stuff was done all the way up past La Gloria, and so any one of these targets can very easily be another Ruby or something else. But the fact that we're seeing a breccia structure at surface certainly says this is something similar to El Rubi. And then it's just a question of if we're in, the right spot with the right, mineralizing events happening, and the plumbing in that area, being the same as the plumbing that obviously, filled El Rubi with all the gold and silver that's there. So I certainly see the potential at all those ever the targets. We'll go and do a reconnaissance style drilling program like we did El Rubi, 5 to 10 holes, and see, what's at each one of those, and then we'll go from there. But no, I definitely see lots of potential for multiple El Rubis on the project. Okay, so you almost started asking or answering my next question. It looks like your focus is on resource expansion, sort of boots on the ground, as you say. How much drilling do you plan to complete over the rest of this year, and how would you break that down between delineation, expansion, and reconnaissance drilling? Yeah, I never like to put a big meter number behind programs because, in my opinion, we're exploration and it all changes hole by hole and what could happen. We're going to have at least one rig turning for the remainder of the year. You may see in December that we add a second, because the rig that'll be doing that deep testing on the back end of the geophysics will be a larger rig. So I'll say starting in December or maybe in early January, depending on when that geophysics program exactly finishes, and if we have enough time to get a rig going before Christmas break in Mexico. But we're going to have a big rig, certainly focused on, exploring El Rubi at depth. And then we're going to have that man-portable rig that'll be moving around. And a lot of that is going to depend on the success of those reconnaissance programs, both at Paradonis, at La Colmena. I think on the back end of those, we're going to move it to the southern end of Macho Libre and test, that a bit deeper. Based on some of the stuff we saw, it looked like we were high in the system there, but there was a lot of really good signs on the southern end of Macho Libre. So that rig really is going to be focused for probably the remainder of this year now, that man-portable rig, on new targets or new stuff that's completely outside of the resource. We'll use that larger rig that'll be at El Rubi. We'll both be expanding up high in the zone where we decide to set that up while it tests those deeper targets. So that, and everything we're doing is expansion. There's no infill drilling. I mean, it's, that's not a game we play. Where for us right now, where we add value is growing and making new discoveries. So, it's exploration. We'll continue to explore and continue to try and expand at Ruby. Again, I think that geophysics we'll see what it shows, but Ruby to the north, expanding to the north, is very important to us, and we see a lot of potential there on the main Ruby structure. And again, if that, depending what that geophysics shows, that man-portable rig will probably move back to the northern part of El Ruby after those reconnaissance program. Obviously, we make a discovery will warrant adding rigs and ramping things up as well, because we'll do exactly what we've done in El Ruby and keep a man-portable on any new discovery that's made, and same thing, systematically step out 50 meters at a time, which is our magic number for resources on the project, and just start delineating those. So I can't give the answer because I don't know what the drill's going to prove out on any of those new targets. But, we probably, with that one rig right now on deeper holes on Ruby, are getting about 450, 500 meters done per week with that rig. If we're doing shallower drilling, then we'll get more meters done in a week. But, those kind of 400 or 500 meter long holes that we've been doing at Ruby now, if not a little longer, then, as you get deeper, they slow down a little bit. But we're going to get a lot of meters done, and we've been getting a lot of meters done. I would think by the end of this year, we'll be close to 20,000 meters of drilling for the year again, and if not more, again, if we add rigs. So, it's exciting, and we'll see what happens. And then hopefully we have a better answer of what the program will look like, starting next year, and how many rigs and what we'll have turning.
Okay. Now you talked about geophysics. What sort of geophysics are you employing here? And is it really to help you find your mineralization, or is it to help identify structures? You said you're high up in the system, you need to get deeper.
Yeah, I mean, the main goal of this geophysics is to show that contact between the rhyolites and whatever package. In our model, we believe it'll be the metasediments. But it could be another andesite package. You never know what we're going to run into down there, depending how things are. Obviously, from the geophysics we've already done, we see that large kind of arrowhead shape, which we've always interpreted as a buried intrusion, because there's certainly nothing on surface that looks like that. But yeah, we're going to do 3D IP with magnetotellurics, and so that is really targeting the contact, but it will also show some structure as well, higher up. Like we said, Ruby North and some other things, we're going to see structure, but the main purpose of that is to show that contact between the rhyolites and the package below, so we can start targeting some deeper drilling on that. And it was a condition of Crescat's investment in us. They allocated that some of the funds had to be done towards this type of geophysics and towards some deeper drilling on the project. And obviously we had no problem doing that, because it was stuff we wanted to do anyways. But we will, like I said, we've been delayed here, like everything else in COVID, on getting this geophysics done. We were originally told that it would be done in August. They had a tough time getting their import permits for their equipment. There's one other job in Mexico that was before us. They've, I guess as of almost a month ago now, they finally got those permits in place. So we were delayed kind of, a couple of weeks at a time, all the way to, where they're starting at the end of October. And that's just been a factor of COVID and getting, stuff through government offices in Mexico. Sometimes it's a lot slower than everybody's hoped for, and it's frustrating for an exploration company. But it was nice that it was, it's done and we're ready, and we're locked in on that kind of end of October date to get that work done. It'll take at least, we're talking about a month, maybe a little more than a month, to do the program that we're doing. We've already got all the lines, we're ready to go for the guys. We've got their camp set up when they're ready to come in. So, and I said, look, we found the one target actually cutting those lines. The guy stumbled onto that breccia structure, Peridones. So yeah, that we're ready to go on, and then we'll be ready to drill once it's done.
Okay, we'll certainly be watching. Is part of your thought process to go after some underground mineralization, and get away from the open pit scenario, or will you take it wherever you get it?
I mean, we're gonna take stuff that's economic wherever we can get it. Again, I don't want to get away fully from that open pit, because I think that's going to be, any company that buys it, they're going to like that for their initial payback. Cheap heap leach mining, low capex. I think that's very appealing, and I do believe that we can expand Ruby, especially to the north, quite a bit. So I won't say that we're getting away from growing the open pit resource, but we're just pausing on the drilling on that front right now until we get that geophysics and show kind of what we can see on the northern part of Ruby. But I do think it's also important to develop an underground resource at Ruby, especially if this model can hold true. High grade underground to follow up your open pit. That's what's really that'll really bring in the major mining companies and their interest if we can have the combination of both.
Yeah, and what's the topography like where you're drilling? Is I'm assuming it's quite variable, and does it get any easier if you're going to the north?
Yeah, to the north on Ruby is very easy. That's flat as can be. You've got, like I said, that plateau is about 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers. Our pit would sit in, about 200, the first 250, and then come off the southern edge of that slope on El Ruby. So yes, as we move north on that main structure, it's very flat, very easy terrain to move around in, to do whatever you want up on El Ruby. But I think for the deeper drilling, the other benefit that we have is that we probably will start on somewhere on the southern end of Ruby, and we can actually set up down on the bottom of that arroyo. So that'll actually save us some meters on drilling. We're moving the camp up closer to El Ruby for logistics reasons as well, which will be helpful. But they can get very easy access to that arroyo and get the a larger rig, whether it's a track mounted rig or whatever rig we're going to end up going with. It can get easily down to that southern end and save us 200 or 300 meters of distance from, as opposed to setting up on top. But if we need to get up top, we'll get it up on top on Ruby and continue to explore that contact as well.
Okay. Now, I know we've got some ongoing drilling ahead of us, but when might you consider another resource update or even a PEA? And then I guess is further met work required in the short term as well?
Yeah, they were definitely, well, let's do the last one first. We're going to do some additional met work. Right now, the additional met work is going to be focused more on the high-grade gold and silver. Because again, as we, potentially develop an underground resource and you start to talk about those high-grade structures, you'd see, like kilogram plus silver and high-grade gold isn't something you want to throw on a leach pad, but you probably want some secondary circuit. So we're going to show, Dale's dealing with the labs right now on exactly which testing they think is the best way to go about that. But we are going to do some additional met work on that high-grade material initially, just to show kind of the percentages you can recover it in the secondary circuit. What was the first part of the question again?
Resource update or PEA?
Yeah, I don't think the next one will be a PEA. I think the next one I would like to have, hopefully, an underground portion to El Ruby, and then, while including expanding on that pit portion as well. Again, I like to go no more than a year between those updates. So hopefully kind of midpoint of next year, we could have another resource update. And, obviously, if it can include a new target or two, that would be fantastic as well for growing ounces quickly. But yeah, I could see midpoint next year doing another resource update. And like I said, it should have a made underground resource at El Ruby, should expand on the open pit portion, and then hopefully some new stuff.
Okay. And then maybe you mentioned ore sorting. Why look at ore sorting in such an early stage?
I think any way you can add value to the project, and especially, in our model where we're trying to make it as attractive to one of those major mining companies to take over, if you can do some of that work and just show that it, will be effective. We've seen it, from being partnered with Agnico and the work they've been doing on our project in Sweden, that it can be very effective and show some very, just showing that, how can you get, higher grade material and spending less money and making, the mine operate efficiently. So it's not a very expensive program to go through. And if we can show that there's some benefits to that right off the bat, then I think, just serve us better when it comes time to sell the project.
Okay, you keep alluding to my next questions here. You are a team of very successful explorers, but you see yourself selling to a major. At what stage do you envision your exit? What do you still need to accomplish before you want to step out?
I mean, I don't think there's never a right exact answer to that. I mean, the right answer is when the major brings, an offer that's too good to refuse for shareholders. I would obviously love to, make, whatever additional discoveries we can make on the project, and show, the more potential you can show and the larger a resource you can show, you're going to get obviously more money in a transaction, and you want to do that in an efficient way that you're not spending more money doing it. The gains would be, on the sale price. But there's not a right answer to that. I mean, I could see a case where we get bought, in the shorter term, if as these majors come further down the totem pole, and are especially on the silver producers that are, pressured to replace their reserves, and with there not being a lot of exposure or quality assets out there, I could see someone trying to make a move earlier. But there's not necessarily a set resource number that I want to see in the company before that happens. We'll just, our job is to continue to work and add value. And when the timing is right on a takeover, I mean, I think the offer from the major will be what dictates that versus, any sort of point that we're at. I mean, if we get to a point where we don't think we can add and no one's come, and then we can start trying to, force a sale process at that point, if we think we're better off selling it and not wanting to drill anymore. But we're definitely not at that point yet on the project.
Okay. Yeah, a couple more questions left. I guess I'll start with the housekeeping here. What's your cash balance, and are you funded for your exploration plans this year? And if you do have to come to market, would future financings be open to retail, or are you still going to target institutions? You are very heavy on the institutions.
We are. And I will say all of our placements have had a retail component to them. So we are. I know a lot of people say at some point you grow and you don't include retail anymore, and you should only go to funds. But no, our placements, I still intend fully to have retail on. I think our retail following is very important, and I'm always looking to grow our retail following. We are financed certainly through this year for our exploration that we'll be doing. We've got about $4 million left in the bank right now from that placement in June. So I don't know when the next placement will be. Obviously, I'd like to do it at higher share prices like everyone. With the pullback that we've had this summer, I think, we'll get into a better market, and our share price will recover very quickly in a better market. And then obviously news driven, if we hit on any of these things, then again, it should dramatically increase the share price. But yeah, like I said, I will certainly include retail. We're financed. We're not in a race to do it. But if we're in the right market and it makes sense to raise money, then we will certainly shore up the balance sheet and not want to let it get too low. And with, the idea coming that we may want to ramp up our exploration program and add a rig or two, then it's always nice to have a lot more cash in the bank.
Yeah. Are you just going to keep the rigs turning, essentially, ongoing?
So this break, we'll have rigs turning for sure. Like I said, we've got enough work to do on those targets that have never been tested, but we've definitely done our ground truthing, and they're drill ready. And then, like you say, on the back end of the geophysics, we're ready to go with a rig to start testing those contacts.
Okay. And then I guess let's finish up here. Can you comment a little bit on the social aspects of working in Sonora, Mexico? How supportive is the locals?
Yeah. I mean, most of our workforce comes from the local communities. Even our project manager is based in, Hermosillo in the state, and from there, it's very important for us. It's work that we've always are focused on. During COVID, we've been providing medicine to those local communities. We've been providing school supplies, any which, we're not a big mining company. We don't have, unlimited pockets on that front, but it's important to us to help where we can. From a permitting drilling standpoint, we're permitted to drill all over the project. We've had a very, good relationship with Seminat and been open and honest about everything that we're doing. And with that man-portable rig especially, it leaves a very low environmental footprint on those drilling. When we're done and move the rig off, we recycle and reuse all the lumber for the pads. We put seed down, after a couple weeks of being done on a pad. It's very difficult to see where those pads were other than a drill collar that's left. The local ranchers have had good relations with us, and we have our agreements, like you said, for land access and drilling permits with the one rancher that we deal with on the northern half of the project. So it's, we've loved working in Sonora. We're very particular about where our group works jurisdiction wise. Even within Mexico, I think there's definitely a lot of, a few states that are far superior to working in other states. And Sonora is definitely one of those states for us. Durango State is another one that we have a lot of history of working with and operating in. it's a government that doesn't have additional royalties in Sonora. Like I said, it's the #1 gold producing state. Most of the producers that operate in Mexico have a mine in Sonora. And if they don't have one in Sonora, they probably have one in Durango, of those two that I named. So it's a great place to work. It's the people understand mining. They understand the benefits of the mining, what it can mean for the livelihood of their families and their kids and their futures. They're very open, that they want mining in that area. They want us to come in and work, but we do want to make sure that they're always happy and we have that open dialogue with them. And I'll credit our full, our team in Mexico and Dale, and it's worked very well. We've been very careful from a COVID standpoint about our staging and making sure that one, we're not somehow being blamed if an outbreak were to happen in the local community. So we've been very aggressive about and adamant where we isolate guys before they come to camp. I should knock on wood, we haven't had a case in camp. We've had a couple false positives on our screening process, but with subsequent testing showed that guys weren't positive, but we haven't had a case yet. And both, Globe Explorer Drilling Company and us, we're working under the same, mindset of how we isolate guys and the protocols to come in, to get into camp, and it's worked very well. So, even though we've had some outbreaks in the local communities, it certainly has not been attributed back to us because our guys aren't spending any time in those local communities when they're coming and going from camp. So, we'll continue to, hopefully keep all those protocols working, and hopefully soon, COVID can be a thing of the past. It doesn't seem like it's going away anytime soon, but we've been able to work very comfortably throughout. And like I said, a lot of it's been keeping that open dialogue with the communities, helping them out, and they've been a fan of ours.
Perfect. Yeah, better safe than sorry. Trust is a hard thing to earn back. So
yes, very much so.
Yeah. So with that, thank you very much for joining us today. That's Steve Cope, CEO of Silver Viper. I'd like to thank everybody else for tuning in. Red Cloud Securities will be back tomorrow afternoon when Taylor sits down with Visionary Gold. That's October 6th at 2 p.m. Eastern. And just a reminder that our Oktoberfest conference is October 18th, 19th, and 20th. And you may sign up at redcloudfs.com. Have a day, everyone. A good day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.